Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Nicole and today I'm going to be talking about the books that I read in August and discussed with you guys in August. So I do these little monthly wrap-ups. I really enjoy them as just like an opportunity to look back on how the month went, because sometimes I feel like I just get caught up in like what I'm currently reading, and yeah, it's just nice to look back at the month as a whole. So I'm actually going to get started first by doing a book review. There is one book that I read in August that I have not reviewed for you guys yet, and that's because it was the book club pick for August. And that book is Resurrection by Leo Tolstoy. And I did already film my book review for this, so I'm going to go ahead and take you into the past when I reviewed it and discuss this book. There we go. I just recently finished reading this book. This is my third or fourth work by Tolstoy that I've read, and I really enjoyed this book. And let me tell you what it is about so you can figure out if you would like to read this. And since I've got a little flashy light going on, I'm going to go ahead and just put the picture up on the screen for you. So let's get into it. So Resurrection is, like I said, a work by Leo Tolstoy. It is the last full-length novel that he wrote. He has three major works of literature. He would probably argue that he only wrote two novels, Resurrection and Anna Karenina, and then a whole bunch of short stories and novellas, and that War and Peace is something else altogether. He refused to call it a novel, if you didn't know that. And I would classify Resurrection as a work of philosophical fiction that is looking at the problem of evil and corruption, particularly in society, but in humans in general, and trying to work through the idea of like, what do you do with evil in the world? Where is suffering involved in that? And what do you do to overcome this problem of evil and corruption that exists in society? Tolstoy is definitely trying to teach a lesson here and to sort of bring to light his own philosophy and ideas on morals and values and what's really important and meaningful in life. And as always with Tolstoy, it's a really fascinating and interesting discussion. The main thrust of our story is centered around Prince Dmitri, whom we meet in the very opening chapters of the book. And he is serving jury duty for a murder trial when, to his great surprise, he discovers that one of the people who is on trial for murder is someone that he knew from earlier in life. Prince Dmitri, up to this point, has been raised as a young gentleman. He is the son of wealthy landowners, and he has lived a life of just sort of casual flippancy towards everything, no real responsibilities or difficulty, and has just been enjoying himself thoroughly and maybe overly much. But who's going to blame him for any of his past behavior, because everybody's doing what he's doing and everybody approves of what he's doing, therefore it must be good. However, once he recognizes the person who is on trial, he realizes that it has to be more than a coincidence that they're meeting under these circumstances. And he basically starts to question everything that he's done in life up to this point, as he starts to struggle with the question of who is really at fault here and who should really be punished for this murder. And whose fault is it that these people are in the situation they're in? Definitely has like super early midlife crisis. That's pretty much what starts going on. And from that point on, Prince Dmitri, whose life has been pretty easy and has only been shaken up a little bit by his own sort of like dabbling in the more bohemian or socialist life, suddenly finds that he just can't go on and let things be. And he starts questioning things that he had been trying to ignore for the last few years. And the story goes on from there. He starts to grapple with everything that he sees happening at this trial, where he starts to have his eyes opened to the reality of the corruption that exists around him, both in the courts, without the courts, with the people that he doesn't know, as well as people he's seen as friends and peers. And it goes on even into deep systems of the government and the penal system. And he really starts to question a lot of the things that he took in life for granted. And before he knows it, he is finding himself really struggling with the society that he's finding himself surrounded by. On the one hand, the easy path is to just continue life as it's been and as everybody expects it to be for him. On the other hand, he starts to feel repulsed by what has been going on in life and is going on in the lives of others. He becomes a lot more conscious of class and of the struggles of those around him who are not living the same life that he is. This book covers a lot of different topics, including issues of morality, the justice system in Russia at the time, their prison systems. It gets into some of the politics of the time, and of course, it shares all of Tolstoy's philosophies on each of these things. It is a deep and dark attack of the society at that time and the way people are living. You will see themes of like the country and peasant life being sort of elevated, while societal life is sort of looking down upon. There were a lot of things that I really enjoyed about this book. For me, with Tolstoy, it's almost always the discussions he has about the various topics that he brings up. I find that he is a writer that is very good about talking about a theme or an idea and then giving you an example within his book or a story within his book that exemplifies what he's talking about. I will say that one of the things that I didn't like in this book were there were times where I felt like we got too much of that story and he kind of went on a little too long. There were definitely a few moments in the middle of the book that I felt like, okay, I don't know that we needed this much of this scene. So there are basically three different like main settings that the book takes place in, and I found the narrative structure very interesting because you have quite a few flashbacks to earlier in Prince Dimitri's life, which serves as a really good foundation for his relationship with the person who's on trial. You have the trial setting itself, and then you have two different settings, maybe three, depending on how you look at it, that happen after the trial. But one of them you spend way more time on than any other, and it kind of takes over the book. I liked the topics and discussion that came up in that part of the book, but it felt a little overly long compared to some other things. There were also things about this book that I wasn't expecting. Having read Anna Karenina and War and Peace, I was expecting a lot of this book to be about domestic life and how these things affected Prince Dimitri in his home and in his later home life. And that is not the direction this book went in at all. When I say that this book is about the criminal justice system and the prison system, it is to a very, very large extent. I did not expect to get pretty much the full court trial or a deep dive into a couple of different areas of society after that. I thought we were going to stay sort of in the homes of people, which is pretty common in War and Peace and in Anna Karenina. So I thought it was a really interesting change, but it also made sense to me. I felt like there were a lot of themes that I saw. I thought there were a lot of themes and discussions that came up in Anna Karenina that were represented here in this book. And I thought a lot of the narrative structure that happened in War and Peace was similar to how this book was structured. In a lot of ways, I can see how this would be his third novel because it did feel like it took some of the highs of both Anna Karenina and War and Peace and meshed them together, but in a completely different storyline than I have experienced with Tolstoy before. All that said and done, did give this book 4 stars. I don't think I loved it quite as much as War and Peace, which remains my favorite work by him. And I also didn't like the novel aspect of it as much as Anna Karenina. So of his novels, it's probably my third favorite, but I do still really enjoy this book. I would recommend this book to anyone who likes philosophical fiction, who likes character studies, and is fascinated by the idea or discussion of topics like criminal justice systems or looking at prison systems. I think there is a lot in this book that is still relevant in discussions today. So if you've read books like The Dream Hotel, I've heard is one, or Chain Gang All Stars, that kind of thing. It's not going to have the amount of action that Chain Gang All Stars has, but you will have a lot of the discussions that come up in more modern day books that are talking about the penal system. Except I don't know that any of them get quite into the deep philosophical thinking surrounding those systems and values. And this is a book that really will challenge you to think about those things. I can see some people not quite liking the end because Tolstoy was fairly religious, and I think the end of the book could potentially get written off by people as being too religious, but I see it as something where whether or not I agree with him on all of his values and each of his points, I still think it's really fascinating to think about them in general and to hear how he would answer these questions. And then it's also fun to argue back and be like, well, no, here's where I think you're wrong or right or whatever. So that's it for Resurrection. I would recommend it for sure if you like Tolstoy. It's definitely another work of his worth giving a try. And to be honest, I don't hear a lot of people talking about this book, and I'm not quite sure why. So hopefully more people will pick it up and give it a looky-loo, and I'm sure it will be some of your favorites. All right, so that's it. I don't recall whether or not I said in the video my star rating for this, but we'll get into that in a moment when I discuss star ratings. So let's go ahead and jump into the part where I talk about my reading stats for the month of August. Let's go ahead and get started. I have written all this down. I don't think I'm going to have as many graphics this month because I'm not using the story graph at this point to talk about my reading wrap-ups, and that's just because on a monthly basis, they're always slightly behind where I'm actually reading or slightly ahead or something like that. Anyway, it's a filming scheduling versus viewing issue. So I'm going to use a variety of different tools to help me discuss my wrap-ups. What you need to know for the month of August is I read a total of 11 books in the month of August. I read a total of 3,782 pages, and my average star rating was 3.81, which is, I feel like, probably my lowest star rating for the year. If not, it's definitely one of the lower star ratings I've had in a while. And I don't know that I can really say why that is. I tried quite a few new books and a lot of them didn't work out. My buddy read for this month didn't necessarily work out. So I guess what I do want to say about the month though is I do want to talk about the 5-star rating I got. I had one book that I gave 5 stars to this month. That probably also has something to do with the average star rating. I know the last few months I've had a couple of 5-star ratings, but this month the only book I gave 5 stars to was Fingersmith. I listened to this on audiobook and I'd highly recommend that. It was a really good read. It's just a really different and interesting story. Historical fiction set in Victorian times. The writing style really gave you the feel of Wilkie Collins and Charles Dickens, but an all-female perspective on this book. Really strong first-person narration. Can't say enough good things about just how well written this book was. And it tells an interesting story. So I did do a short book review on that, so you can go and watch that if you want to hear more about this book. My least favorite book this month got 3 stars as a rating, so it wasn't absolutely horrific, but it definitely was not my favorite, and that ended up going to XYZT. This was a book that the premise sounded really good, where you have 2 students who have created a teleportation machine that can take people from the US and Iran and let them teleport to the other country, bypassing immigration and all sorts of things, and allowing them to stay with a host family and experience what life is like in this other country. There were a lot of interesting discussions in this book, but where it fell apart for me was just that the whole plot was presented in a very confusing manner. And so I just struggled to understand what was even going on throughout the entire book. It was unnecessarily convoluted and confusing. And even when I looked at reviews for this book, the vast majority of them seemed to have the same complaint. So that was unfortunate. This book has been on my TBR for a while, and it was one that I kind of spontaneously picked up as part of my birthday haul, and I wish it had have gone better. And 3 other books that I gave 4 stars to are Regeneration, which is, I would basically say, a really good book and part of what I think is going to be a new favorite series. This discusses World War I soldiers who have come home and are in a war psychiatric unit or hospital trying to be cured of their shell shock so that they can be sent back to war. So well written, so many fascinating discussions. I can't wait to get on to book 2 in this series. I also have Standing Heavy. This is a book that I read that is part of world literature. It features largely Africans who are living in France, and they are from the Ivory Coast originally, as is the author. And This book, I would say, ended better than it started. And then the last book, one that I recently read, is Bone China by Roma Tearne. This is a TBR vet for me. Pretty sure I've owned this book for a while. I do know that. And I don't know why I kept putting it off, but I feel like it almost made it onto a couple of TBRs, and I think it's even been on my TBRs for a while, or on and off, and then just never got read. And honestly, I regret not reading this book sooner. It was really good. This talks about a family and their experience starting in Sri Lanka just before civil war breaks out there, all the way through a couple of generations. So this is a historical fiction about Sri Lanka. Part of it takes place in Sri Lanka, part of it takes place in England. There's discussion of immigration, there's a discussion of colonialism, there's a discussion of post-colonialism, and then you also just follow a really fascinating, interesting family through multiple generations. So it's also a multi-generational saga. I wouldn't say this is like best multi-generational saga I've ever read, but it's definitely the type of family story that I like to read. And I did recently discuss earlier this month, like how I struggle with family stories. This is a family story that is the type that I like, where the family overall, like they have their own problems, they're complex characters, but they really do love each other. And, you know, they do their best towards one another and they're supportive of one another. And not everybody in the family is perfect by any means, and you know there's rivalries and this and that, but overall the book was full of just a lot of realistic family dynamics and not over dramatized family dynamics. And yeah, I really enjoyed this book. So I think that's the last of my favorite books or books that I really enjoyed this month. Another book that I read this month is Julia, and this was not as good as I was hoping it was going to be. I did read 1984, I think a year or two ago, and that went well, but I also thought that was just okay. I feel like the tone of this book is very similar to 1984 and can get kind of dry and long-winded like 1984. I will say towards the end of the book, I listened to the audiobook and I thought that was way better. So that's how I would recommend approaching this. All of those books, like I said, you can find in my past weekly reading wrap-ups in the month of August if you want to see more information about them. And I do try to link in the description of those videos which books I'm talking about, so if you want to search and look around that way. Oh, and I forgot another book. Another 3-star read for me was Only God Can Make a Tree. And this book honestly was only a 3 because the writing was not like that good. It was just okay writing. But the plot and the drama in this story, pretty A+. So, you know, if you just like a lot of drama and want to learn about life on a Caribbean island, post-colonialism and slavery, it's not a horrible pick. And then I did have 2 books that I DNF'd. One of them is my Antonia. This just really didn't work for me. I have discovered this month that something I don't like is books that have are books that feature a community where like the vast majority of the people in the community are super unlikable. Just not my vibe. I think I like books that feature communities where there's a bit more variety in the type of people that are there. And then finally, I also decided not really to DNF Vanity Fair because that makes it sound like I started reading it. I actually attempted reading Vanity Fair and maybe read the first 80 pages a couple of months ago and decided that I didn't want to read it at that time. I did have it on my TBR in August and was planning on picking it up again in August. And I just decided after a couple other reads and making a couple of decisions that this really just isn't a book that I want to read. So I am going to unhaul this. All right, so now for some of the exciting stuff. I am participating in the hardest reading challenge you'll ever do, and I do have an update for that. I think I mentioned before that I'm not going to talk about how I'm doing in the hardest reading challenge every single month. My plan is to talk about HRCYED anytime that I have completed squares, and that I would do that all at the end of the month. So I have completed 2 squares on the bingo board. And I have to admit that one of the two squares kind of surprises me. But before I get to that, I do want to say that I have completed 20 books total in the time period that I'm doing HRCYED 2. And yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about my progress, especially since it just starts in July. And I know that to finish all like the sub task or whatever you want to call them for HRCYED, I need to average about 9 books a month. So I'm well ahead of that. Not really. I'm two books ahead of that. Let's do some good math here. But I'm feeling good. I'm feeling good. I'm feeling on track, and I'm feeling like it's possible, despite the fact that some of the books that I've read for this challenge are really long. So how have I done? I completed the 24-hour readathon. This prompt is basically to see how many books you can read in a 24-hour period. So you just choose a 24-hour period to read. It's not a stay up all night. It's not a, cram as many books in unless you want to. My approach to doing it was to just see how many books do I read in a 24-hour period? And I just kind of naturally let this happen. I got to one evening and I realized that just in terms of what I felt like reading and needed to read for a buddy read at the time was going to have me with 2 shorter books, or I think even 3 shorter books that I was going to be reading back to back. And to me, that felt like a really good opportunity to see how many of them I could get done in a 24-hour period. So I ended up reading 2 books during the 24-hour period. I did sleep during that period a normal amount of time, and I also did normal, like, daily activities, eat breakfast, clean. I think I ran an errand maybe. And I was able to read a total of 296 pages. The 2 books that I read were What Kingdom and Michael Kohlhass. So books that, What Kingdom was on my TBR in July. I think both of these were books that happened in July. And Michael Kohlhass, well, they had to have both happened at the same time because I read them in the same 24 hours. Anyway, Michael Kohlhass was a book that I was reading for extra credit for my high school required reading challenge. The second square that I finished off of the bingo board is for the translation challenge. I'm not surprised, honestly, that I completed this challenge pretty quickly. I do tend to like to read a lot of translated fiction and books from around the world in general. I read 5 different languages. That was the challenge, was to read 5 books that were all originally written in 5 different languages. Of course, you can read them in whatever language that you speak. I think the only thing is that the language did not count if it was your primary spoken language, which for me is English. And so I will put the little graphic I have on the screen so that you can see the books. But I did read a book in Russian, German, Danish, French, and Japanese. And those books in order were Stalingrad, Michael Kohlhaas, What Kingdom, Standing Heavy, and Kokoro. And in case you're wondering about What Kingdom and Standing and Michael Kohlhaas both showing up on both of these challenges, you can count 1 book for a maximum of 2 different challenges. So it just happened that in this case, yeah, I have a graphic showing those 2 things overlapping, or I had 2 books that happened to overlap. So that worked out really well for me. I will say that even though I've only mentioned 5 books, the other 15 books are all slotted into other challenges. It's just there's no other challenges off the bingo board that I have completed yet. So I guess now I'll talk about what I'm currently reading. I have these 2 huge books that I'm currently in the middle of. How that has happened this month, I don't know. I mean, Clarissa is my year-long read. That is going really well. I'm currently behind as of the day that I'm filming this because I went on a trip that was just overnight and I was not bringing Clarissa for that. So and it looks like I fell behind on a day where we had a decent amount of reading, which is a shame. Anyway, I am on page 1208 in this book. If you're curious, this book is about 1,400 pages long. So we are 200 pages away from the end, which is really exciting and kind of crazy to think. I lied. I lied. This book is almost 1,500 pages long. I knew that seemed too short. Anyway, we're almost 300 pages from the end. Those last 300 pages are going to cover reading from September to December. So I think there's going to be fewer and fewer pages to read over the course of time, which based on what's happening in the plot of the book right now makes a lot of sense. So I am reading this with a whole bunch of people and we are discussing it and chatting about the different letters that we read in here over on the story graph. This is a epistolary novel, so there are a whole bunch of letters in here and they are all dated, and the plan is that we are reading the letters on the dates that they were written. And so, yeah, I've got a couple of days to catch up on, but that should happen pretty easily. And it's going really well. The story is wrapping up. There is a little upcoming, tension that is happening because there's the possibility of, I don't know, some sort of tomfoolery, shall we say, that's going to happen and may have happened in the days that I've missed. So I'm definitely curious about picking up. But at this point, I'm feeling really bad for Clarissa. Things have just not gone well and continued to not go well for the poor girl. Another book that I am currently reading is Little Dorrit by Charles Dickens. I just started this recently, and yeah, this is basically going to go on September's, wrap up. I'm not very that's the notes. That would look like I'm very far in the book. I'm not very far in the book. I am on page 172, and I haven't read it for the last 2 days because of my travel, but I am looking forward to getting back into it. It's definitely taking a different direction than I expected, and there's a very fascinating sort of subplot going on, which honestly I don't even know if it's the subplot. I think what's happened is what I thought was going to be the major plot of the story is kind of a subplot in the story, and what I would have expected to be a subplot is the main plot. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I'm enjoying it. I look forward to just making some normal progress in this over the next couple of days. Then finally, I have a couple of things that I don't know why I didn't talk about these earlier. I think in my mind they were upcoming, but it's because at the time I'm filming this, they haven't been released yet. I'm getting confused with my own scheduling. But I do have the high school required reading challenge to update you guys on. In the month of August, we did discuss, we being my friend Alex and I, To Kill a Mockingbird, and we also discussed our thoughts on Go Set a Watchman. Both of these books are by Harper Lee, and we have a whole long video discussion where we sort of podcast style discuss our reading experience, where we think this fits in the high school required reading canon, if you will. And yeah, it was a lot that we went through there. So you can go ahead and check out the video on that if you're interested in hearing the discussion and my rating and all those things on that book. Another book that I haven't talked about yet because I'm not going to share my review on, but that I did read in the month of August is Kokoro. So this is the book club pick for the month of September, and I will put the date and time that we were meeting to discuss this book on there. If you're interested in joining my book club, you just have to hit the join button below, and that will make you one of my channel members once you go through that process. And then you can just send me a quick email and be added to our book club page to make sure you get the links and the announcements and all that kind of thing. I am really looking forward to talking about this book. It's very different conclusion and direction than what I expected. And I have mentioned, and I will mention again, please check the content warnings on this if you know you have certain triggers, especially surrounding mental health and the like. And yeah, so I'm not going to share my thoughts about this because I'm going to share them with my book club members first. And then basically like I did with Resurrection, you'll get my review on this book when I do my September wrap up. So even though I got into my currently reading, I think I've now talked to you about every book that I read in the month of August. Let me show you the stack. Okay, and oh my, and what a stack it is. Let me see if I can even get these all up so you can see them. Would have helped if I moved the camera back. So there is everything. The bottom two are the two books that I DNF'd and am definitely unhauling. And I will say everything from Go Set a Watchman, which is the blue book that says Harper Lee on it, everything under that, I will likely be unhauling. Maybe not Julia, because it does pair with 1984. And like I said, if it's a book project and there's books that pair with it, I tend to keep them. But honestly, I wasn't a huge fan of 1984 either. So I don't know. Those books will likely be unhauled. And I've got a growing stack of books over there that I need to unhaul. And I'm thinking I might start a Pingo shop. So if that happens, I'll definitely let you guys know. So if you're interested in reading any of these books and would like to get them at a discount, you'll be able to do that, I guess. So I have a couple of exciting things coming up. I do have the rest of my TBR to get through from the Unicorn Games, and I did ask somebody if I could share the order that I plan on reading them in. I mentioned that I'm currently in the middle of reading Little Dorrit, which is off of that TBR game, and then here is the rest of the books from my TBR that I still have to read from the Unicorn Game. The next one that I plan on picking up from this stack is Sword of Kaigen, and this is the order that I plan on reading them. So I would then read Of Human Bondage, Yalo, and finally the Makioka Sisters. And on the bottom here is not a book from my TBR game. This is actually the next book in the high school required reading challenge, which is The Grapes of Wrath. So Alex and I will be reading this probably sometime in the next couple of weeks. And then a few weeks after that, we will be putting out our book discussion on that. So be sure to like and subscribe to both my channel as well as Alex's channel if you want to follow the discussion. That video will be put up on Alex's channel because this is her high school required reading pick. And we're kind of going back and forth. Whoever's listed is on, that's whose channel the video is on. And if you have no idea what that high school challenge, required reading challenge is, I will put a link in the description box below where you can see the two different playlists that we have. One that's on the tag video that we created related to it, and the other one is all the book discussions that we have had. And then as far as my HRCYED plans go, I still have to read my August new release pick, which is not good because it means I'm falling behind on the new releases. And it was the new releases on HRCYED 1 that actually stopped me from actually being able to finish the challenge as it was laid out. So I don't want to fall behind again. The rules were slightly changed this year where you don't have to read the new release in the month it's released. You have, I think, 60 days either before or after it's released to read it, and that is good. So I picked up People Like Us by Jason Mott. Last year, I believe it was, I read Hell of a Book by him, which was amazing. I'm hoping for really good things from this book. I'm not going to review it right now because I will do that when I do a reading wrap-up on this. But do know that this is going to come up pretty soon because it came out at the beginning of August. So if I'm correct on the timeline, I think I have until the beginning of October to read it, but I have a lot of buddy reads going on in that time period. So I'm going to have to be pretty careful about getting to this. I can say right off the bat, I love the paper and the formatting in this book and the different things they did with that. So, and I didn't realize this at the time, even though it clearly says on the cover with a sticker, but who reads those? I was able to get a signed copy. That just happened to be all the copies that they had in the store. So that was a nice boon. All right, and then what else? So other things that are up and coming, I am still going to be having reading sprints on Monday from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. EDT until the time changes and it'll be EST. I don't know. That'll be coming up whenever the time changes. I feel like we've got a while before that happens. But every Monday, I host reading and productivity sprints in case you didn't know that and you would like to join me live just to hang out and read some books or do whatever you are doing that day. I think that is finally it. I am now surrounded by a ton of books. I'm sitting on the floor. I think my leg is falling asleep. So it seems like a good time to end this video. So that is what I read in August. I also shared what I'm currently reading and what I will be reading, and I think that's enough.